in the streets. So I think it's a rare thing, but I definitely think that in 90% of the cases of the spirits that I encounter, they're not bound in this dimension. They can go from the fourth dimension to our dimension.
Let me give another shout out again for another super chat. Tammy George, thank you again so much. You guys are literally the reason why I'm able to do these live. Okay, another question for you, Sam. This is from Aaron Johnson. Does he notice more activity on ley lines? Ooh, that's a good question, actually.
Absolutely. So getting back to Salem, I think that Salem is one big ley line. And if you look at the activity beneath, it definitely follows the pattern. So you were talking about patterns earlier. There's a ley line that basically follows the path of the Salem witch trials. And so, I had definitely investigated it. And I think that the geodynamics of a location really affects the hauntings. I found that was the case. I investigated the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, and I think it's on
yes.
on a landline too. I definitely have, and that's a great question, and I think that there's a lot going on, especially with residual hauntings in ley lines.
I'm glad you actually just beat me to it. I was just going to ask you what's the most haunted locations that you've been to outside of that area, including Queen Mary and the Stanley Hotel, which you just mentioned, the Stanley Hotel. Now,
you just read my mind.
yeah. Staying on the Stanley, is there a particular room that's more haunted than others, or is it just the entire hotel?
Well, I was on it, so every hotel I worked at hotels as a night auditor for many years. So I've worked at hotels that supposedly aren't haunted, but every hotel that I've worked at has been haunted. But yeah, so at the Stanley Hotel, of course, I get put into. I literally put on my reservation, do not put me in the most haunted room. I really say that. And I'm like, please don't put me in the most haunted room. And then they put me in the most haunted room. Almost it happens like every time. So I was on the third floor. I was actually in 313, but the room that's the most haunted, the one that inspired The Shining at the Stanley Hotel, was 317. And I'm like, oh, I'm in 313, so it's not going to be haunted. Well, guess what? I mean, that whole room was a suite. So my room was part of the haunted suite. So it was haunted. People say like the whole Stanley Hotel is haunted. I'll tell you, it's not a bad haunting. Like I think there's been a lot of misinformation regarding like death and destruction and the energy there is actually, I think, very positive actually. So I would say it's very haunted, but I would say that it's very haunted with positive energy. It's not bad.
Again, positive energy, that's a good thing. But even though, see, I've been asked this multiple times, would I be more scared of ghosts than aliens, which you talked about? And I say eat ghosts. Even if they're friendly, it still is just something about their nature and their history that really scares the crap out of
me. That scares you?
More so than anything else,
well,
that's for sure.
If I experience ghosts all the time. If I saw a gray or anything alien, I would flip out. I would literally have a breakdown. so some of it, I think that God or higher power puts things in our life that doesn't give us more than what we can handle. I think if I had a paranormal, if I had a alien encounter, I think that I would probably have to deal with it. And I'm open-minded to it. It just scares me so much. It really does. And I think that for whatever reason, and ghosts scared me too for most of my life. And I got to the point where when I wrote my first book, I'm like, you know what? It's like interviewing people, but they're dead. And I started basically approaching spirits with a story to be told, and that's when my whole perspective on them changed. And that could happen with the aliens too. That could happen with the extraterrestrials as well. And maybe in 20 years I'll be interviewing Bigfoot out in the field. But with that said, I mean, ghosts for me is it wasn't always the case, but ghosts don't scare me. Like I'm more afraid of people than I am of ghosts.
Interesting. Because of the capabilities of people.
I think I mean, ghosts. The question that you asked really early on in the interview, do you know of a ghost actually killing somebody? No. I mean, they're just pictures. They can't hurt you, but people can hurt you. So I think that I think that people that are possessed by an entity could hurt you. So who knows that whether the people have good or negative intentions, and then whether or not that they were there. I mean, I was just at the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast in Fall River, and my theory with Lizzie Borden was that, and I've interacted with her spirit.
Lizzie Borden.
I think.
Can you remind me who she is?
Yeah, so Lizzie Borden Lizzie Borden took an axe, killed her mother and her stepmother Abby Borden, and then with an axe in 1892. So it's a famous case. It's a case that I have to. You're on the West Coast, so this is like Lizzie Borden is the big, like other than Salem, it's like the big case. So I was just at the Lizzie Borden, and actually have a book called Mass Murders coming out in April about murders that happened in Massachusetts. So, and the ghosts associated with them. So anyway, Lizzie Borden. So Lizzie Borden is a famous case. It's a major whodunit because we don't know what she was acquitted of the murder of her stepmother and her father. But I think with Lizzie Borden specifically, I think that she may have been may have been possessed. I really do. I think she may have had an attachment, and that's what led her to kill her dad and her stepmom. Having had an attachment and knowing what happens to you in that state, if it was a really bad attachment, that could have happened. So I do think if you look I do think if you interact with her spirit, and I have interacted with, and she wanted to be called Lizbeth, and she told me I went to her later in life home called Maplecroft, and also in Fall River, and my communication with her was she didn't do it. Like she's like, I did not commit that murder, and don't call me back to the murder house. She doesn't want to go back there. So with that said, I think that the what was the question again? I'm sorry. I'm like going off on Lizzie Borden here.
No, I was asking you who she was before you were talking about her.
Oh, Lizzie Borden. Who is she? Yes, so she murdered her, allegedly murdered her. Well, she was accused of murdering her stepmother Abby and her dad Andrew Borden in August, either July or August of 1892. I do know that it was 200 years after the Salem witch trials, which was 1692, which is also kind of weird. Another weird twist in all of this too, Dr. J, is like, why am I so fascinated with the Salem witch trials? Why am I so fascinated with Lizzie Borden? Turns out that I'm related to both of them.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. So, and I'm actually from Florida. So my mother, meanwhile, I'm writing all these books about the Salem witch trials and Lizzie Borden and all that. And my mother's, meanwhile, she's Southern. She's like, Sam, I think we burned witches. And I'm like, Mom, we didn't burn witches. They weren't burned. They were hanged. And so it turns out that my family, I'm related to the Putnam family. The Putnam family were, in my opinion, the bad guys in the Salem witch trials. They're the ones that were responsible for accusing almost 62 people for being a witch during the witch trials. The afflicted girl, Ann Putnam Jr., is my cousin. It also turns out I'm related to Lizzie Borden. And so I have two ties from my family that were, so it turns out in those situations, they came originally from Rhode Island and married into the Putnam family and also into the Borden family.
Wow. Now, I've interviewed, I don't even know the guy's name. I interviewed the great grandson. I want to say something Hughes, but he's allegedly the first serial killer here in America and is probably thought to be Jack the Ripper. Do you know who I'm talking about?
H.H. Holmes?
Yes, thank you, thank you. That's right. That's right. Have you ever seen or heard of any of these evil people from our history that have been executed? He was executed in the electric chair, right?
I don't really know. I'm not a serial killer expert. I do know that H.H. Holmes originally came from New Hampshire,
Mm-hmm.
from this area. So he grew up in this area. I think this may have been a precursor to electric chairs, because I think it was like the 1800s.
Okay, so
Probably was
hanging or
hanged.
firing squad.
Yeah, yeah, or firing squad. Yeah, and I think with the way they like, even back, so Richard Crownshield, the gentleman who possessed me, he was a murderer. He actually didn't. He supposedly committed suicide in prison, by hanging. So that the fact that the spirit wanted me to jump off my balcony, kind of like
Jeez.
like that's weird, because he committed suicide when he was living. But anyway, but the two people that hired Richard Crownshield, the Knapp brothers, were hanged for being accomplices in the murder. So I think that he probably was hanged. But yeah, H.H. Holmes, very macabre case. I even with Gacy, so maybe some backstory with me. I grew up in Chicago, and my
Oh, the
dad was from
Windy
the Navy,
City.
so
Chi-town. Yeah, the Windy
exactly.
City. Yeah.
So Chicago until I was like 7, and then my parents divorced, and then I moved to Florida. So no ties to New England whatsoever. Like, it was like I had no idea that my family was originally dating back, centuries, to. But so I remember as a child hearing about like Gacy and about H.H. Holmes from like the locals, and kind of like Gacy was like the boogeyman, like locally, in Chicago. So yeah, I mean, like, I had childhood memories from that, but it was so horrific that I kind of blocked it out. And maybe that's why I'm terrified of clowns. But maybe
Well, it's a good
like the whole, like, the
reason.
Gacy thing.
Actually, I never knew. Of course I've heard the name John Wayne Gacy, but I'd never known that he was a clown who killed people. I know he killed people. It wasn't until a couple nights ago that some way, somehow, this low level AI, which they call iPhones, magically picked up for some reason, was showing me on suggested videos of John Wayne Gacy. I don't know why I was not searching murderers, serial killers, or anything like that. And yet, there goes a full 48-minute documentary and an hour and a half B movie, fictional. Well, not really fictional, but as fictional as can be, and as close to as can be movie, and it just blows me away. Let me tell you a quick story about why AI scares the crap out of me. I I dug up my old regular Nintendo back from the 80s. You remember that?
I do. I'm old enough to remember
Yeah, yeah,
that.
right. So I hadn't played Super Mario Brothers since 1988, maybe 87. And I wanted to play the darn thing. I don't have it. I just have the system. So I ordered it on eBay off my iPhone. I have a smart TV. What do you think is the very first video that pops up on my smart TV?
John Wayne Gacy.
No, Super Mario Brothers 3 Tips and Tricks. How
Oh,
the
okay.
hell did they know? Different email address for eBay, different email address signed into Samsung TV, and yet there you go. It's synced. And it's like, whoa, okay. Now I'm taking it back. I know I've heard Edward Snowden say that he has to do a little phone surgery. He removes the microphone and camera from his phone. When he wants to make a phone call, he plugs in a headset with the microphone. That way, nobody can hear him and listen to him. But to me, I'm like, oh no. And then you might have heard this too. I know I'm going off topic. I'll come right back. That
It's okay.
Google just achieved quantum supremacy. Wow. Are we in for a ride in the next 10, 20, 30 years? I think so. I don't know if it's good for us, to tell you the truth. Anyhow, I got another question for you here. Let me find it for you. Here, let me back it up here. Let's find out. I know it was, I believe, Lasha, but something is not acting properly. Lasha, if you could repost that question, that would be fantastic. Let me check one more time. Yes. Does he think that there are more murders now or also mass shootings because there are more possessions? Is evil getting stronger on Earth?
That's a good question. I think that I mean, if you look at the numbers, I think the numbers actually there are fewer murders in America now than say like 20 years ago. However, I do think that possessions or attachments can turn in two different directions, either suicide or murder. So I do think that we probably should look at some of these cases like Lizzie Borden, like even Gacy, I mean, or Dahmer, like a lot of the serial killers, and look at sort of, or like, and look at like what I mean, like why would they do that? And I think people that specialize in serial killers, they would say that they're kind of wired that way as sociopaths. But then I really think that yeah, I mean, it doesn't make any logical sense to anybody really, and I think that's why it's so fascinating to a lot of people. So I don't think that there are more murders now. I do think that there's a spiritual battle going on, and as someone that's clairvoyant, you can see it. You can see the battle between, not see everything's black and white, but there's stuff going on in the spiritual realm that could have been going on. I'm a lot more gifted now than I was as a child, but I definitely see a lot of upheaval with things now, and I do think it's escalating.
Okay, a couple more for you. This is a shorter question. I'm going in reverse order for this one. Maybe the mass shooters are possessed. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean this is my whole theory. This is sort of like, having had and what do you call what happened to me? I on the TV show A Haunting, I called it possession. But I think it's an extreme attachment manipulation. So I do think that you can be influenced by entities. I don't want to say that these entities are are demons, but I do think demons do exist. I've talked to people that I respect who have encountered I can't even say the word demons. But with that said, I think that a lot of what goes on in our society, which should be looked at with a paranormal lens, and that's what I do in my book, Mass Murders. I really look at cases using a paranormal lens to get a different perspective on a lot of these cases that have been looked at over and over and over again. And as someone that's been gifted as a clairvoyant, I can, I have worked with law enforcement groups. I have worked with, cold cases and stuff. So I think that, so I definitely think that, I mean, do these people, should they take accountability? Absolutely. And if you're a mass shooter and you hurt a lot of people, like they should be put in prison or given the death penalty.
I agree.
But
yes.
But with that said, I mean, I do think that in a lot of the cases that I've covered, specifically the Lizzie Borden case, is that that there may have been something else going on that's paranormal.
Here's an interesting fact that I just found out. Ted Bundy, when he started to confess, his blue eyes, the pupils would be so dilated they would be all black, like pure evil was coming out. And I know for decades they've been talking about, is there a serial killer gene? I looked it up, and sure enough, they've identified one.
Right, and so that could be the case. So it could be like Ted Bundy has a serial killer gene. Lizzie Borden has a serial killer gene. Well, she just killed her parents. But yeah, I mean, but why would his pupils dilate? Like that, is that genetics?
No, no, I mean, and it's not rational. He's not doing coke or meth in prison, I don't think, right? He wasn't, at least at the time, during the months that the journalist was able to interview him. And the irony is Ted Bundy never spoke as, I did this, I did that, unless it was something good. Oh, I was in law school. Oh, I traveled here. I was there. I was there. But when the journalist said, why don't we try to put you, Ted, into a third person, and boom, that was the ticket for him to start confessing. And I was like, wow, I wonder why. Was it just like an ego sort of thing? But yeah, the journalist described multiple times that only when he was talking about the evil, evil, evil deeds he did would his eyes just turn fully black, from movies that I'm thinking of. Paranormal Activity, The Chosen Ones. Remember all those kids, all black eyes?
Yeah, I mean, to give you some insight and not to scare you. So when I had the entity attachment, that happened to my eyes too. So I have a greenish hazel eyes, and my eyes have always changed color. But my friend Joni said that my pupils dilated and they were like black disc, and I don't even remember talking to her. So it's happened to me, and so I know if it's happened to me, then it's probably happened to other people too.
I have another super chatter in here. I want to thank you, Dirty Sanchez, and I thank you and God bless you, brother. I appreciate you for being here and supporting. Okay, now I'm assuming, I mean, this would be safe to assume, with 50 million people dying in World War II, there has to be ghosts in Nazi Germany, on the Soviet East or Western Front, well, now Russian front. I don't know what parts consisted of, but it was far more than just Russia, Ukraine, and Yugoslavia then, and even Pearl Harbor. Do you know of any of these war criminals or war people that were involved in war that are in fact still haunting the places they died?
Yeah, so I mean, to give you some insight with me, so my specialty now is the Salem witch trials, but back when I was in college, it was the Holocaust. So I know a lot about the Holocaust that happened during the rise of National Socialism. I
Mm-hmm.
do think that like locations like Auschwitz or the concentration camps have a lot of energy lingering there to the point where I don't want to go there to feel it. My family, I'm Lithuanian. So my family on side, my mom's side, which is connected to all the family, the Salem witch trials, and then also Lizzie Borden. But on my dad's side, I'm Lithuanian. So Lithuania had Einsatzgruppen that were responsible for killing undesirables in the woods of Vilnius and Lithuania. So I do think that there's a lot of hauntings associated with World War II. I think for me personally, I was getting some insight. My publisher said, don't cover anything that's less than, like, it has to be older than 100 years to feature
Wow.
in my book. So I had to
Oh.
fight for 50. So World War II would actually qualify
Mm.
for that, because the reason why is because if there's family members still living, and for example, I included Whitey Bulger in my book, and Whitey Bulger's huge in Boston.
Yes.
And,
Oh God, yes. He
and
was
so
arrested here in Santa Monica. I remember that. FBI,
and,
what they did is they used the landlord to get him to go down and to check his, I guess you could say, closet over his car in the garage. And that's when the feds got to him. And when they tore down his walls, they found I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not maybe millions, and a ton of weapons, and a real cache of weapons that you cannot buy in California. Maybe not even in the States anymore.
So Whitey Bulger is featured in my book, but what I had to do is focus on the perp and not the victims. I do think that what what I've experienced out in the field, that for the most part, the perpetrators are the ones that stick around, and not the victims. So if there was a heinous, if someone was murdered, unless there's unfinished business with them, which I have encountered in some situations. So getting back to World War II, I do think that there's a lot of hauntings associated with World War II, but I just can't. In some cases, I can't talk about it. But I do know the U.S. of Salem, for example, which is where I would say I've had my even more profound experiences than Salem. There's something like an elemental on the ship, and there's also residual from. It's actually not World War II. It never saw combat, but it served as a triage vessel in the Mediterranean during the Ionian earthquake in Greece, and that's when I encountered the Greek-speaking ghosts. And the reason why is because the victims from Greece are still lingering on that ship from the afterlife. There was also deaths, burning deaths from the USS Cleveland. So I've encountered World War II related spirits, but I would say that it would be spirits with unfinished business. Like for the victims, the Greek victims of the earthquake, they may not know that they're dead. They're or as Hans Holzer calls, left behind. They still think they're living, or they're still, and they're like, why are you on this ship? Because this is mine, kind of thing. So, but yeah, like I definitely kind of, I would say like bucket list, because of my history with studying the Holocaust. I would like to go to Auschwitz. I would like to. So my family, on my dad's side, was part of during the rise of National Socialism in Lithuania, in the Einsatz group and in Crystal Night, and so they were put in the gulags. So gulags were kind of like pre-concentration camps for intellectuals that happened in Lithuania. So yeah, I mean, I know a lot about the Holocaust and World War II, and I do think that there's a lot of ghosts associated with that.
Now, let me ask you about Ouija boards. What's your take on using a Ouija board? Do you use one? Because I have two right behind me, as a matter of fact. And no one wants to use it with me. And I'm not going to use it by myself.
All right. So what is the thing about Ouija boards? I think that if you know how to use them, then you should have no problem. I think it could be a spirit communication device. I don't like Ouija boards. If you look at every case where there's something really bad to happen, usually there's a Ouija board involved or spirit board involved. So kind of getting back to Annabelle, like it's sort of like just based on anecdotal evidence, I'd stay away from spirit boards. I had a friend who actually made a spirit board or Ouija board for me with Salem on it, and it was beautiful. And he's like, oh, it's just a piece of art. And I ended up donating it to one of the TV shows that I was on called Most Terrifying Places, because I just didn't want it in my house. Because I feel like for whatever reason it attracts negativity. I'll say my theory, though, it's not the board, it's the planchette. For what I think it's
You mean that little the whatever you call it, what you view the letters and numbers from, right? That you put your fingers on, that part.
Yeah, I think what for whatever reason it's the planchette that is the kind of like the doorway or the portal to the other side, because the energy is going into that. So so when I had my spirit board that was made for me in the house, it was like a piece of art. I didn't have any problems, but I didn't use it, and I didn't have a planchette. So my theory is that if there was a planchette involved, that would have been what would cause the issue. So I never got a planchette.
Now, there's a huge misconception that 666 is an evil number. However, in the seventh copy of the papyrus in the British Museum of the Revelations 13:18, the number is 616. Somewhere during the translation to Latin and English, it got lost and changed to 666. Why do you think there is so much fear on that number when it's completely wrong?
It's weird. I'm not as, that's bad. I'm not as freaked out by the number as other people are. I think that, I don't, I think it's just because it's biblical, it's in the Bible, and I think that getting back to like feeding energy, feeding negativity, I think that we've given that number power by being afraid of it. And I don't want to give the bad stuff power, and I think that's what, because it does appear in the Bible, even though it's not 6-1, even though it's based on what you read, it should be 616, but still, it's like I think we've been so afraid of it for so long, we've kind of created a tulpa or a thought form, and the thought form is from our energy being afraid, and it feeds off of that fear.
Yes, yes. And you know what? Speaking about feeding off of fear, it's not just ghosts. I've noticed that even people mention with regards to ETs that the more fear you give, the more fear you have, even though you're trying to hide it, they can sense it. Like kind of like a dog will sense, fear or happiness, things like that. These entities sense it, and that's when you're ultimately more vulnerable, and that's why they usually come to you more often.
And I do think, getting back to what I was saying about the beacon of light, I think that the reason why I was so terrified for so long, there was a reason why I was so terrified, because I had so many experiences when I was a child, and then. So I was kind of like Danny from The Shining when I was a child. So it was like my greatest fear. Just like clowns, just like dolls terrify me. There's a reason why I'm scared of that. And maybe I blocked it out. Maybe it's something that I just can't explain. But it definitely has something that that is inexplicable to it. So yeah, I mean, I think that I think we our fears feed the bad stuff, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it on the USS Salem. I've worked at on the USS Salem when it was a very haunted vessel with a haunted attraction. So they put a haunted house on a haunted vessel. It was like a toxic mix of hauntings. It was just, the spirits were extremely upset. The haunted attraction was feeding the energy on the vessel, so the spirit activity is through the roof after that. And I think you'll find that that's the case of like Eastern State Penitentiary or Queen Mary or the Stanley. I think that all these, or even Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, they have investigations every night at there, and it stirs the pot over and over and over and over and over again. So like that is going to feed the fear. That's going to manifest into extreme hauntings.
I've heard from scores and scores of people that at the time of death of someone close, that the living person will see at the foot of their bed that person, the dead person that they don't even know is dead yet because they just passed, show up at the foot of their bed. Have you heard of this phenomena?
I have. So my dad, I was talking about him earlier. He died last December 26th. So I had a situation where my dad, I heard, this is when he was still in a coma. I heard him say, he's like, Sam, and I look around, and it was my dad's voice. And I thought my dad was like surprising me or something. And he said, "Goodbye, son." And so this is before he died. So, and he just went into a coma. So I had that happen. My old roommate, who died from cancer, his name's John Anderson. I saw him or his spirit sitting on his bed playing with his cats. And then 10 minutes later, he walks in. He was at work when I saw that. He died. He didn't die immediately. He actually died a few years after that. But so yeah, I mean, I've experienced it firsthand.
Interesting. Very interesting. So you are one of also those people that experienced it yourself. Okay, another question for you here. Okay, Lasha Senyak. Do ghosts see each other and form groups or even have fights? What is the relationship ghosts have with other ghosts? Good question, actually.
That's a great question. So I've been in locations where the ghosts don't know each other, and for whatever reason, they're could meet in the same room, and they're on different wavelengths, you know. But I've also seen, and I was referring to the U.S. of Salem, where there's a priest that kind of stayed behind to protect the ghost children on the vessel. So he obviously is where I've seen over and over and over again. Usually it's brothels, you know, because for some reason I end up like investigating brothels all over New England. But where the male energy is dominant over the female energy, like it doesn't want the female to talk. So I do think that some locations that the spirits they work together. Sometimes there's oppression going on, like as in like the male entity is oppressing the female in the afterlife. I do think that I mean, all sorts of ghosts. I mean, I've experienced like good ones, bad ones, just like people. They're good people, bad people. So yeah, I mean, I really think it really depends on the situation. But some cases, like they don't even know that the other ghosts are there. But a lot of times that they do, they all know the ghosts in the house.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, because I'm on the West Coast, I know Weird California, that book Weird has done other states, like maybe Weird Nevada, maybe Weird Arizona. Do you know if any of the Weird series have come to the East Coast?
Yeah, so it's the Weird series started in New Jersey, Weird New Jersey. Actually, Jeff, you mentioned Jeff Bellinger, who was on your show. You talked about him earlier. Yeah. He wrote Weird Massachusetts. So he wrote the Massachusetts one. Yeah, so we definitely had it. Actually came from this area. It came from New Jersey, and then it went all over the country.
Wow, you know what? It's ironic. Out of the few times, well, not few, but multiple times I've interviewed Mr. Bellinger, he never mentioned that. Even, I mean, maybe because we only had an hour, sometimes two. I'm surprised. Maybe he was too proud to acknowledge something that successful. Because to me, those are some of the greatest books, and especially Weird California, being local, where I could know and visualize where each of the locations are and what's happening with them all. They scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, I mean, but one of my first ghost books actually. When I was writing my first book, Ghost to Boston, like I got all like I read as many ghost books as I could, and there was Jeff. I think he wrote the second version of it. But yeah, so I'm a huge fan of it called Weird, which was the genesis of the Weird series. And so I would read like it was a magazine for many years. And so when I would go, because I would go to the Jersey Shore to Asbury Park a lot for vacation, and I would get all the back issues of Weird New Jersey, and that was like my favorite magazine for many years. So even before the books, like I thought it was great, even as a magazine.
Interesting. Now, how many years have you been involved in paranormal research? Is it because you were born with the gift of clairvoyance that got you to this?
Well, again, I was a journalist for many years, so I would write about the paranormal. I would even do a lot of research when I would do. It would be every Halloween. So it wasn't like a year-round, 24/7 thing that I have now. I had what I call paranormal blinders for most of my 20s, 30s. So I would have experiences that were inexplicable, like a hand grabbing my leg kind of thing, or seeing a full-bodied apparition and just seeing, something explainable. It's just fog. Like I use that over and over again. I've been sober for 12 years, so I also attributed it to the fact that I was drinking alcohol, and like maybe I was like hallucinating from drinking alcohol.
That's why they call it spirits. Yeah, I noticed that.
Well, exactly. My maybe like being drunk. Like I would have experiences. So I would say, like when I got sober, that's when I still had stuff happen, still experienced spirits, and not the kind you drink. And then that's when I really got full throttle, went into it. So I would say coming up on 10 years now, for like full time. But I've been sensitive to the paranormal my entire life since I was a little boy.
And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
I'm in my 40s.
Oh, wow. So we're both fairly young, because I just turned 40 a few days ago. So, 4 decades.
I'm a little older than you.
Yeah. But 4 decades of what you've been experiencing, I definitely would think, would, let me ask you this. This is a better question to ask you. Why do you think the mainstream media does not really cover these topics? Until recently, we have Travel Channel shows, Destination America, Some History, Nat Geo Discovery, but for the long part, for the most of the history of those channels, they did not want to cover ghosts, ETs, haunted places with a 10-foot pole. Why is that?
Credibility. I was a journalist for many years. So when I became, I took the jump to go into the paranormal. I'll tell you, like when I launched my first book, Ghost to Boston, people would go to my lectures and they would buy my book, but they would want it put into like a brown paper bag, like it was like, or ghost porn. So I think people were very much like, people think they were crazy. I would say that's when I first started, like 10 years ago. I think now, because of all the shows, because of people like me writing books, making it more of the mainstream, you see people talking about and sharing their experiences, and they're a lot more educated now than they were 10 years ago. So I think that it's a sign of the times. Do I think that spirit activity has intensified? No, but I think people are more educated and they can talk about it now. And I think before that they shrugged it off as non-paranormal, and I think it's just becoming more acceptable by the mainstream.
What would you like to change as far as media when it comes to these topics, paranormal and everything under the bus?
I really think that you kind of have the old school. I think what I would really like for us to do is to view a lot of the shows, and I'm on a lot of the shows, view it as entertainment. So sometimes you have a show like the Holmes Files, which I think is fantastic, or even the new Ghost Hunters, where they actually do investigate. I think that a lot of it is an entertainment thing, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what we're doing, what we're doing out in the field. What I would really like to see is actual getting the history correct, and using ghosts as a tool, as a historical tool. You see that out of all the shows, I would say the one that gets the history the most correct. Any guesses?
No, actually. You tell me.
Ghost Adventures. Ghost Adventures.
Oh, duh. And then the reboot, Ghost Nation, right?
Right. Well, Ghost Adventures is the one with Zach, and Jeff actually is a writer on that show. So the reason why I think the history is actually correct on Ghost Adventures is because of Jeff. So long story short, I would like using these shows as a way to correctly tell history, and not focusing on like trying to capture a full-bodied apparition on camera or an EVP, but trying to history correct and telling their story correctly.
In the 80s, we had things like Unsolved Mysteries, and every time they talked about a story, they would end, could it be? Is this person seeing something? Now you have less so. I'll give you an example. I spoke to Kevin Burns, the creator and writer of Ancient Aliens, and I asked him, why do you think your show, Ancient Aliens, is more successful than other shows that talk about ETs? He says, well, I was asked the same thing about, the same question from Discovery Channel. And he said to them, when you talk about Jesus, do you put a skeptic there? And they were silent. And I think that has a lot to do with it because they do not they use a lot of what ifs, but they don't have Michael Shermer at the end of the show just saying, oh, this person is hallucinating, this person it belongs in a loony bin, puzzle factory, whatever it be. There's less
Right.
skepticism as far as in the entertainment sector, but still, it's history, and that's what's important to me. Now, you mentioned earlier, you said your publisher mentioned you have to write cases in the past 100 years or less.
Right, but I had to negotiate with them, so it's actually 50 years. So what I did is if I did focus on a case that was more recent, then I had to focus on the perpetrator and not the victim. So it was important for me to honor the families and not really go into gory detail what happened to them, but also just focus on, for example, the Whitey Bulger chapter. I don't talk about the victims of Whitey Bulger. I do talk about Whitey Bulger though.
Perpetrator. Yeah, yeah. Good call.
Right.
And you know what? Knock on wood, he did receive justice. Sure, he was beaten to death, not executed properly, but at his age, he probably would have died of natural causes long before the death penalty. These days, it takes an average of 22 years on death row before you're executed. Not so in the 70s or 80s. Timothy McVeigh, for instance, 4 years and he was gone. They made sure to execute him on a federal level. I don't know what's changed. I know a lot of people I mean, especially here in California, Gavin Newsom has halted all executions on the basis of the Eighth Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment. And I don't think there ever will be a proper way to kill somebody without causing some pain because the three different kinds of medicine used in a lethal injection, one stops or causes or relieves your anxiety. One stops, I believe, your breathing, and another one, the third one, stops your heart. However, none of them dull the pain. I think it would just load them up with a bunch of opiates and let them go out, painlessly, like someone in a hospital or hospice. But that's not the way our world works, unfortunately.
I've always debated, like, for example, like Bundy and like these horrific killers, like
Mm-hmm.
what my thoughts are on the death penalty. I think that we should study them. I mean, I know that Bundy was studied over and over again, but I really think that, you know, well, I mean, like Bulger probably would have been in prison for the rest of his life, like going through trials and stuff. And like justice, like karma, like basically he got what he was going back to. In other words, I don't think two wrongs make a right. I think that, like with someone like Bundy or Dahmer, I think that there was a lot of victims that probably wanted to see that justice to take place for their executions. But I also think that, even that they're killers. I mean, like, what if there was a possession? What if Bundy was possessed? Or what if Dahmer was possessed, or Gacy was possessed? I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of like, I believe in definitely incarceration, keeping them from hurting other people, but I also am a believer in two wrongs don't make a right.
That's right.
And a very liberal Massachusetts, Massachusetts is so liberal.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we're
I
like,
know, I
yeah,
know. I've never been there,
what?
but I know Michael Dukakis very, very well. I've known him long before I've been doing radio, and I also I've spoken to Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. You know who that is, right?
I mean,
He
no. I
he
mean, like,
was
what,
the
what?
he was a Senate candidate who ran in
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do. I do.
2018
Yeah.
and run against Senator Elizabeth Warren. But yeah, I
Okay.
get
Yeah.
I
No,
get the
I know who he
feel
is.
that it's super 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 well, I don't want to liberal, not conservative, but liberal. It's not like say Louisiana or Texas, for instance. It's the opposite.
Or my part of Florida that I grew up in. Yeah, I
Yeah,
grew up in a very
yeah.
conservative part of Florida. so so I know conservatives. Like I know, like where I grew up, it was like, like Texas, for example. Texas is like hang 'em like a burn. I've always been like very sensitive. Um, not- what like I'm not defending the murderers. What I'm saying is, I just think that they'll get theirs, and I see that over and over again. Like they'll get like whatever they put out, it will come back to them, and it'll come back to them in the afterlife.
Now, because we've gone a couple minutes over, if you don't mind, and you're absolutely right, they will come back in the afterlife. Back to what you were saying earlier, two wrongs don't make a right. And execution is homicide. It's at the hands of another person or other people. It just happens to be the state or the federal government. Doesn't mean it's not homicide, it's not suicide, and it sure isn't anything else, but it is homicide. And you're right, two wrongs don't make a right. Personally, I think someone living in, say, ADX Supermax for decades in solitary, I think that might be a punishment worse than death. I had a DE agent on Monday, and we were talking about this, and he said if he had to spend 20 if he was sentenced to life in prison and if he had to spend 24 hours in solitary, he would go crazy. He would ask for a lethal injection. You can't really do that as a client, I can tell you that much, but even your lawyers can't go ahead and petition the court for an execution instead of life without parole, because you do have these nonprofit organizations doing what they can to keep you alive. Okay, now, since I've gone a couple of minutes over, let me get a couple more things from you. First of all, let's talk about, and if you could tell everybody all the television shows you were on. I know there's many, but give people
Yeah.
some highlights where to find you.
All right. So the biggest one really was it's called Provoking Evil on a Haunting. It was the 100th episode of a haunting. Is the highest rated episode of a haunting on the Travel Channel. So it's called Provoking Evil. You go to my website, Baltrusis.com. I give you kind of a rundown. This last year, I was on Most Terrifying Places for 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I was on a show called Haunted Towns, which started off on Destination America with the Tennessee Race Chasers, and then it went to Travel Channel. So it was on that show as well. I was on a show called Haunted Encounters. I've done a lot of stuff coming up that I can't really talk about, like that I've already filmed. Well, I could tell you one. I filmed a show called Paranormal Night Shift.
But these
That's
will
coming
all
up in
be
2020.
shown in 2020, right?
Well, all the ones that I just said, they replay them over and over again, especially in October.
Yeah.
So you'll probably see them. Like, for example, a haunting, you can actually, if you go to On Demand or even go to YouTube, you can still watch Provoking Evil on your cable system or on YouTube or Amazon Prime. But the one show that hasn't come out yet, it's called Paranormal Night Shift, and that's coming out in 2020.
Now, you've penned 11 books. It's going to be a long list, I know, but can you remember them? It's kind of hard. If I had 11 books and you asked me on the spot, can I tell you all of the names of them?
I mean, they're all my babies, so of course I remember them. So it's Ghost of Boston, and the names are, a lot of the titles are similar. So Ghost of Boston, Ghost of Cambridge, Ghost of Salem. Then it's Haunted Boston Harbor. It is it's Haunted Boston Harbor. We have Paranormal Provincetown. We have my 13 Most Haunted series, so 13 Most Haunted in Massachusetts. 13 Most Haunted Inns and Hotels of New England, 13 Most Haunted Cemeteries, 13 Most Haunted Crime Scenes Beyond Boston. And then my most recent ones are, so Mass Murders is the one that's coming out, Ghost Writers, Wicked Salem, and I'm currently writing a book called Ghosts of the American Revolution. So those are all my 11 books.
Between appearances, TV shows, radio shows, books, you are definitely busy. And using dowsing rods. You know, it's ironic. I actually wrote down dowsing rod. I'm going to go ahead and get one after this. I'm going to go on eBay or find some website, you know, like some sort of psychic store, and I'm going to buy myself some dowsing rods. That's what's missing from my collection.
Yeah, dowsing rods are fantastic, but they got to kind of either have them made for you or have them call you. It's kind of like a wand, like Harry Potter looking for a wand, and why not swans? It's like my dowsing rods. I had dowsing rods for years, and I hated them because they didn't work for me. But when I finally got the right pair, it's like magic. So make sure you get the right pair.
And I'm going to ask you that off air exactly what I could do to make sure something is tailor made for me or someone is calling for me. Now, a couple more things. Well, one thing from you. If you have, merge this to two questions. One, you've already mentioned your website. If you could repeat that. But also, finally, if you had a final message to everyone, what would you say?
Final message. I mean, I think the bottom line is a ghost is history wanting to be remembered. So I think a ghost there's ties with history and with ghosts. And my job as a paranormal researcher is to get the history correct, and it's also to really focus on history as the ghost lore is a way to tell history, and it lures the kids in, and it kind of teaches them about history. So the bottom line to all like what I'm doing is the role of history, and history repeats itself. So I guess if I have one line is history repeats itself, and don't let it happen again.
And we're bound to repeat it if we don't know it. Very, very good statement. Sam, I'm going to ask you to stick by for a quick moment so I could say thank you off air. Let me address everybody real quick. First, I want to thank the Super Chatters. We have Justin T, Tammy George, and Dirty Sanchez, also known as Rockstar. But hey, you guys are rock, especially those of you who are in the Blue Crew. Thank you so much for being moderators. I also want to thank Lasha Senyuk and Pam Vrettenberg for their artwork. They always provide me with great artwork, and Pam has been providing it for years, actually, as a matter of fact. Make sure you check out Pam's website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. I won't be back here till Monday unless I decide to do this weekend that stream that I promised you, how to get out of any traffic ticket legally. Okay, that's priceless information right there, especially if you live in a large city. And also, remember, if you're watching this right now on YouTube, you could see every single one of my social media links. Everything is under the same name, which is the name of the show. That is Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. Everything from Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, YouTube, Facebook, Minds, whatever you could see, Patreon even. It's all the same name. It's not very hard to find me. That I can promise you. And the things that I personally check, don't send me an email, because unless I know you're sending me something and I'm going to be watching for it, it's going to get buried in the 58,000 plus unread emails that have accumulated over on 13 accounts over years. So I prefer not to get emails. However, if you have my phone number, don't hesitate to use it. If I miss your call, make sure you text me to tell me who it was, especially if I don't have your phone number. That way I can contact you the moment I am free or awake, whichever happens first. And I also want to tell you that if you tag me on Twitter, and I only follow one person, the President of the United States, that way no one can say, why don't you follow me, and et cetera, et cetera. It's easier that way. Just tag me, and I promise you I will respond. And you, especially Paper Crane Wishes, knows if you tag me in it, I will retweet it and, of course, like it. Same thing with YouTube. Every single comment I see while we're live on air, and then after the fact, after the video is published, I have the YouTube Studio app on both my iPhones. I can check and I see them. I get alerts all day long, all night long when they come. It's me who responds. Occasionally Instagram and Minds. I'm going to start pushing Minds more often. If you don't have a Minds account, Minds, it's basically a Facebook without censorship, and it's also open source. It also pays you in cryptocurrency, so you can't go wrong there. If you would like to be on Minds, please do let me know so I could send you a referral link. It works out to both our benefits. And so Minds I'm going to start trying to use more often, but since it's more like a Facebook type uh, platform, Pam will probably run it because she does a fabulous job taking care of my Facebook. So, with that being said, folks, this is Dr. J. God bless you all. Be safe. Be good to each other. Remember what Sam said. We have to know our history or we are bound to repeat it. So, so true. And that's why I fear what's happening on the left. We made sure that USSR failed. The communism fell. That was a huge thing when I was in, I believe it was eighth grade, somewhere around there when the Soviet Union collapsed. And if you were called a Nazi in the 50s or not Nazi, communist in the 50s or 60s, that was like the lowest form of insult, the worst insult you can get. Yet now it's being embraced. I fear that, folks. Having social programs is not a bad idea, but having socialism is. And if anyone can figure out a way how to come up with $52 trillion on top of our $3 to $4 trillion budget in the United States for this Medicare for all for 1 year without losing 2 million jobs at least and and obviously increasing taxes and everything else, let me know because I don't think it's a good idea. And obviously, just like Sam said, history repeats itself. And in this case, we have several examples where socialism did not work. With that being said, Sam and I are officially signing off and have a good night.
Have a good day.